We are still in chapter 5 of Matthew, and we're doing our second part here of going through what's called the Sermon on the Mount. And so if you weren't here last week, then you missed us getting started on this one of Jesus's more famous discourses. And so one of the points that we started out by making last week is that this whole sermon is just about impossible to understand correctly unless you understand the prevailing religious setting that Jesus was speaking into. All right. And so this was a legalistic, self-righteous, defensive, form of rabbinic teaching that essentially dominated this entire culture. And this kind of religious thinking was exemplified by the Pharisees, who were represented in the audience that Jesus is talking to. But everyone in the audience was raised under this way of thinking about God. And so you will miss the true intent of Jesus's words entirely if you don't realize that this is a sermon of both proposition and refutation against what was going on at the time. And so Jesus is refuting a particular point of view. And so in this part, he's still talking about the way of happiness, or the blessed way. And so this continues sort of what is called the Beatitudes. And so people like this are blessed, or people like this are happy, is pretty much what he's saying. And we went through several of these last week. We're going to keep going through them this morning. And so this is verse 9. That's where we're at. And it says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God." And so we need to be sure that we see here that his concern is not with peaceful people, all right, but with people who make peace. And so a peacemaker is not someone who just avoids conflict. And a peacemaker is also not the same as a peace faker. All right, so pretending like everything is okay, or ignoring the problems that are sitting right in front of us in order to maintain the illusion of peace, is not at all what Jesus is extolling here. So being a peacemaker is actually a really active concept. And so this is a person that places a very high value on relational unity. And so this person understands the importance of building deep relationships with other people and cultivating those relationships over a long period of time and developing the quality of the unity that we have in the body of Christ. And so peacemakers are sensitive to disunity and conflict when it breaks out. And it's inevitable that it will break out in any group that's not faking it. All right. And so these peacemakers are able to make peace when they sense that alienation is building. Okay. So they're able to wade in and help people to establish resolution in their conflicts. And so this is a wonderful and powerful ability to have. And James talks about this in James 1, and he connects this with the wisdom from above and says that it's the mark of a wise person. And so some people, the more they talk about conflict, the worse it gets. They escalate things inside themselves and in the people all around them. And so you have to be kind of wise to wade into conflict and establish peace. Now, Jesus is like the supreme peacemaker. All right, Jesus took the most intense conflict of all time, the conflict between God and us, and he made peace in that conflict. Romans 5, Paul explains this. He says, "Therefore, since we have been made right in God's sight by faith, we have peace with God because of what Jesus Christ, our Lord, has done for us." Peace with God. It's kind of a relief. right? The realization that my conflict with God, my lifelong avoidance of God, my loathing of God's authority has been brought into a place of peace, right? I don't have to be afraid of him. All the tension that this creates, that sense that I have that something is wrong in my life, that sense of needing more, that absence at the core of who we are has all been dealt with by what Jesus did on the cross. And, notice how we enter into this peace with God, having been made right in God's sight by faith. Right? It's entirely by faith in what Jesus has done for us. That's the only thing that we need. Jesus has already paid the price for the separation and the sin and the evil that I have done. The price has been paid by Jesus at the cross. But the question is, will I trust him on that? Will I trust that the work that he did is adequate to bring me into peace with God? If I do trust it, then I get to experience this very cool thing, right? The inner peace that Paul says surpasses all understanding in Philippians 4. So this is something that's pretty easy to notice once you really start to believe, right? All of your problems are still there, but there's a peace in your soul that wasn't there before. So peace with God. It's a very cool thing that we're talking about here. And so while we're considering this concept, we need to remember what it is that Jesus is refuting in this point. And so he's already lining things up in this sermon to take a shot later. And so we're going to look ahead a little bit in this sermon where he says in chapter 5, 43, that you have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. All right. And so in the rabbinic teaching of the time, it was totally okay to hate your enemy. They had no problem with that at all. And so love the people that you love and fight like crazy with the people that you don't love was basically what they taught. And, be sure to hate them at least as much as they hate you. All right. And so, of course, Jesus is going to reject that idea and argue that that is not at all the way of God. And in extolling the peacemaker right now in this verse, he's preparing to make that point later. All right, so verse 10 says, blessed are those who are persecuted for doing right, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And then verse 11 says, blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. All right, and so it looks like we need to make sure that it is because of Christ, right? Not just because I'm being a jackass or whatever. You can't just be rude to people and then they're being mean to you because of it. And then you're like, oh, look, people are persecuting me. All right, has to be because of Christ. Okay, so if it's truly because of Christ, then we're blessed. He says, rejoice and be glad because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So we're talking about persecution, and Jesus says the persecuted life is part of the blessed life, or part of a happy life. It's kind of an odd argument to try and make, I think. And it assumes that the life that we're living is in the context of some opposition. So what we're doing here is not going to move forward without a fight. There are forces lined up against us because, theoretically we're on the side of God, and those forces are lined up against God. And therefore, persecution is inevitable. And in fact, persecution is a mark that we're getting the same treatment that Jesus got because we're doing the same thing that he did, which is bringing the love of God to the world. So it also shows that this desire to make peace is not the same thing as butt kissing. All right. And so at what price are we prepared to purchase peace? And some prices are too high. Okay. If you forfeit the truth or skirt around the issues that people don't want to hear, then that's too high a price. Okay. So if you're speaking truth for God, then you're going to be telling people things that they don't want to hear sometimes. So humanity doesn't want to hear about sin. People don't want to hear that they're not good enough for God and that they cannot buy God's acceptance with their good works or their church attendance or whatever. People are not that into hearing that they're completely helpless to save themselves. And so there's nothing that they can do but accept the free handout from God. And that's not what people want to hear most of the time. And so we would much rather hear religion. We like the idea that if we are disciplined enough, then we can work our way up and attain some very high level of spirituality. And it's just not the message that God sends us out with. And so we'll find that this strange message about our ability to gain peace with God is fought at every single step along the way. John 15:20, Jesus says, "Remember the words I spoke to you. No servant is greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you also." So that's what happens. Jesus was persecuted, and his followers have been persecuted from that day all the way to this one. And so, you may not be aware of how much persecution there still is for Christians. People that are authorities in this field have argued that more Christians have died from persecution or did die from persecution in the 20th century than in any previous century. All right, and possibly even if you took several other centuries and put them together. And so one of the big forces for persecution of Christians in the modern age is communism, all right, especially through the 20th century. And so in communist countries, especially still in China, thousands of Christians are in prison and are being worked to death in prison camps. And so, where we live, the biggest threat that we might face is like some harsh language, all right, which Jesus mentioned. And, that would be good for us to see, according to Jesus, because that shows that you're hitting some of the tender spots. And so if you are attracting some persecution, then you are doing something right, because that's exactly what happened when Jesus spoke. 2 Timothy 3, Paul says, "Now, in fact, all who want to live godly lives in Christ Jesus will be persecuted." So, put your helmet on, man. It's going to be a bumpy ride. So if you don't have the stomach for this, then you're not going to really be able to live for Christ. Opposition is going to come from people that you care about. Sometimes really vicious things that, sort of come out of left field. But that's the way this works. It's a biblical and spiritual principle that this is what's going to happen. And here's something for us to think about for most of us. What does it mean if you have no persecution? Right? What if you're not being persecuted at all? It's not a good sign. Jesus said this in Luke 6. "Woe to you when all men speak well of you, for that's how your fathers treated the false prophets." Woe to you. All right, you've got to wonder why you're not being persecuted. So there should at least be people talking smack somewhere about you. All right? Sociological attack is about all we can hope for in our day and age, but there should be something. Okay, someone should be attacking, your reputation or your doctrine or calling us heretics or something. Okay? So, some of us periodically go far enough in what we're willing to say or do that we attract a little bit of this. All right? But, we should be very cheerful about it showing up. But the lack of persecution in your life is not good. And so if you're not being persecuted, are you really even doing anything, right? Are you really spitting it out? Because if you're saying it clearly, then you should be drawing a little bit of fire. All righty. Verse 13. This is a new message, actually. It says, "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled by men." So it's a brand new point that Jesus is making. And so you have this blessed life or the Beatitudes, and then he says that all this stuff comes into your life, but it's not about you. All right, it's not for you. It's actually for other people. The Christian life is not about you. All right, so there is one reason why God wants to bless your life, and that's so that you can turn around and give it to other people. And so in this regard, following Jesus is different than any other spiritual thing that you could get into. So you could go take a class on, transcendental meditation or yoga, and that kind of stuff is entirely for you. It's to make your life better, but not Christianity. We get built up, but it's not for us at all. It's for us to give out to others. That's what he's saying here. And salt tastes good, right? That's what Jesus is focusing on here because of this comment here about it losing its saltiness. It's the taste that he's talking about. And so some people talk about this passage and talk about the fact that salt was a preservative and that kind of thing. But I don't really see it applying in this context. It's the tastiness of salt, the flavor enhancing quality of it that makes it attractive. So how does salt lose its saltiness or lose its taste? Well, their salt was different from ours. It was primarily from the Dead Sea, where you can sort of just scoop it up off of everything that it's crusting all over. But there was lots of other minerals in with their salt. And so if you got some salt from the Dead Sea and you left it out and it got wet or damp even, the salt, being super water soluble, would leach out. And it would leave behind these other minerals that looked like salt, but would have absolutely no saltiness, right? Like they would have no similar taste at all. And so that's what he's talking about here. This is like a little slice of life from their particular region. Our salt doesn't do this. Our salt can't lose its saltiness. But theirs could. And once that happened, the stuff was pretty much useless. You just throw it out. And so he's saying that the plural, you, are the salt of the earth. So people are supposed to be attracted to the something savory that they perceive in you. And again, the plural, you. And Jesus is concerned that you might lose this saltiness or this attractiveness. All right, well, what could make that happen? Well, it could be a couple of things. In Luke 14, Jesus talks about salt losing its saltiness because of low commitment. And so this is the one where he says that you have to put him ahead of father, mother, brother, sister, everything else, right? Christ comes first, even to the point that you're prepared to lose those other things. And so if we have some sort of half-baked, weak version of commitment to Christ, it just isn't that appealing to anybody. Right? You can take a broad look out at American Christianity and see examples of this all over the place. Millions of people that claim to be Christians, but it doesn't really seem to mean anything, right? Nothing's really fundamentally different in their lives. So this is like lukewarm coffee we're talking about, right? Nobody wants any of that. And so this can happen for other reasons as well, but we'll get to that later. Jesus is going to throw down another metaphor for us first. It says, "You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house." So this is an age before electricity. It was dark there at night. They didn't have ambient light all over the place like we do. And so if you had to get a lamp. If they had these oil lamps that they would carry around or that they would have in buildings. And if they didn't have them, they couldn't really see where they were going. It was actually dark. All right. And so light helps you to see your way. And you put it up on a stand, and then you can see where things are and where you're going. And that's the picture that he's laying out here. And he's saying that you are like a light to the world. There's supposed to be something about you that kind of shows people the way. People are supposed to catch sight of it and realize that they need the same thing. Right? And his concern in this case is that people might take this nice lamp and put a bowl or a basket over it to cover it up and plunge the people around them back into darkness. So this light part and this salt part are put forward in direct refutation of the position of the religious consensus of the day. So the religious consensus that they held could be called like fortress theology. And so in this theology, the faithful people are in danger. All right. Sin encroaches on you from every direction. You're surrounded by sinners. And since sin is kind of contagious in their view, you got to huddle up the faithful so that you aren't, penetrated and infected by sin. All right. That's a big theme in all the Gospels, but mostly so in Matthew. And so the opponents that Jesus is confronting here would never consider going into venues where people were actively sinning. They would stay very far from that. They wouldn't even touch a person that they thought was sinful. Right? They would have to go through like a ritual washing to remove the moral filth if they did that. And they were very defensive about cultivating their holiness and not letting sinners, all around them to infect them with the sin that they had. And so this is a completely crazy attitude, all right? Sin does not come into you from the outside. And later, Jesus is going to directly refute this idea. Sin comes from inside of you, and it comes out from there. So Jesus is strongly against this, but he's also against the corollary sense that we have to protect ourselves and get away from sinners. Right? That's putting the light under a bowl. And the reason that we cannot go and separate ourselves from people that are alienated from God is because it is them that need the light. All right, so if we withdraw and avoid people that are hostile to God and live nothing like God would have us live, then we are putting the light under a bowl. All right, so tribalism is a potential cause for us putting the light under a bowl. So tribalism is the perspective that is focused on our little tribe of people. We just like being with each other, and we really just don't see any need to be with those other people. Right? We are, we're the people that really get it, and, we just want to enjoy each other. Outsiders are kind of annoying. They don't really understand what we're into and what we're talking about. And so we can't really find the time to build into them. And we're pretty resistant to people that might want to be in our little tribe because, it's kind of good the way it is. Tribalism is putting the light under a bowl. We're depriving the world of something that it needs light. Maybe we're just too preoccupied and living too selfishly. All right, there are millions of so-called Christians living all around us that can't find any time to do anything at all except what they need to do for their life. They're preoccupied working their job and fussing with their family and fussing with their house and trying to keep the lawn free of crabgrass. All right, they just can't find the time to get outside of themselves and relate to lost people that need God. All right, too busy for that. All right, it's exactly what people say. They don't have time. All right. Then there are others that do have the time. They know they should be sharing their faith and building relationships with people, but they're just scared. Right? They don't want to risk it. The fear of some kind of that persecution that Jesus mentioned is enough to deter us. The possibility of rejection. Someone might think you're an idiot for what you're into. Can't stand the thought of someone thinking that we aren't cool, so we back away and we say nothing at all. Right? We've put the light under a bowl. Putting the light under a bowl is a sin of omission. Right? It's a failure to successfully let our light shine. Right? We're directly commanded to do that in this next verse. All right, it says, "In the same way, let your light shine before men, that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven." Well, that's kind of interesting. See your good deeds. All right, that might be a little bit unexpected if this whole thing is not about works. Right, but it's not just about words. All right, our words are important. They're necessary. Right? We do need to speak about it. Otherwise, people may completely misinterpret the things that they're seeing. All right, so I heard a story once where these two guys worked across from each other for 15 years. The one guy shows up to work on Monday morning, and he says that he went to some retreat and had this amazing experience, and he thinks that he met God. And the other guy's like, "Praise the Lord. I've been praying for you for 15 years. And the first guy's like, "You jackass." Right? For 15 years, this guy that's not a Christian has been saying that you don't have to be a Christian to be a good person. And this guy that he worked with has been his best proof that that was true. Right? Because the Christian guy hadn't said anything, his deeds are completely misinterpreted, and he had actually become an obstacle to this other guy finding God. You have to have some words, all right, to go along with your deeds. You have to explain yourself. And so, the reason that you are the way that you are is because you're into God. And so you should probably say that occasionally. But deeds, all right, is what we're talking about here. And I think it's Augustine that's given credit for saying something like, we need to go out and evangelize to the world, and if necessary, use words. All right, so that's a little bit exaggerated. In order to make the point, we probably nearly always need to use some words. All right, but we really do need these deeds too. And so Jesus is like honed in on the deeds here. And so there's supposed to be a difference between followers of Jesus and other people in the world. All right? None of us would disagree with that. The potential disagreement comes from what kind of difference there is supposed to be. And so here is where the problem is with the modern reading of the Sermon on the Mount. And so to be a person that is attractive, like salt, or a person that is instructive, like the light, and to contrast with the darkness that's around us, what does that really look like? All right, so in the next chapter, in this same sermon, it shows that Jesus is again lining up the pieces so that he can take another shot at refuting something that was going on in that religious climate at the time. And he says, beware of practicing your righteousness before men to be noticed by them. But in the verse that we just read, he said to let your light shine so that people might see your deeds. Right? So is this contradictory? Right? And so the solution is in the context of chapter 6. We're going to get into it more later. But right in that context, Jesus makes a list of things. Charitable giving, all right, showing off your giving, sounding the horn when you drop the money in the basket, right, trying to prove what a generous giver you are. Prayer, all right, standing on the street corner and carrying on with all that righteous prayer that you're doing, right? And he brings up fasting. All right, so they would, at the time, they would put ash on themselves so that people would know that they were fasting and so that they would look worse than what they really were. And so they've been fasting for like 10 minutes and they would be like all stooped over and gray from their ordeal. All right, and so these are the examples that Jesus gives in the context of chapter 6. And all of them have something in common. They're all like religious type deeds. They're all deeds that express just how religious a person is. And it's those things that Jesus says not to do out where people will notice to show off how observant you are. All right, he says that when you pray, you should go into your closet where nobody can see. Right? God can see you just fine. Standing on the corner to do that is actually pretty gross. It's flaunting your self-righteousness. You're proclaiming just how righteous you are to the people around you. It's not how righteous we are that's supposed to be different between us and the rest of the world. And these Pharisees would say that that is exactly what is supposed to be different about us. Right? And I know plenty of people that would say that now too. Right? So this is not an even remotely ambiguous point in the Bible. This is laid out right in front of us. This is Philippians 2. It says, "Do everything without complaining or arguing, so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault in a crooked and depraved generation, in which you shine like stars in the universe." And so it is not the person at work that prays out loud before lunch that convinces people that they need to get in there with God. All right, but this, what Paul's talking about here, if there's a person at work that never seems to complain or grumble and doesn't dispute and argue and make trouble and is just warmer than the other people, then that is something that may pique someone's curiosity. Right? People may want to find out how that's done. John 13, Jesus says, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this, all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." That is the good deeds that we're supposed to be letting the world see. That is letting your light shine. A person that doesn't know God should be able to come into the presence of Christians and sense that there is something different there. Right? These people have got something that I am just not sure that I have. They should sense the presence of love. And so often that is just not the case. In fact, Christian groups are notorious for making people feel like they're not welcome, or for being like a little Bible club that keeps outsiders at a distance. And so I grew up in the church. I left the church. All right? And one of the things that made me feel justified in leaving was the hypocrisy that was evident in this kind of behavior. It's all just crap, right? It doesn't work. And it was coming across a group of people that were demonstrating real love, exactly like this is talking about in the way that we're describing this morning, that brought me back to God and back to church. All right. And so that is exactly what we should be trying to do and practice and be. And that is shining the light. John 17:21, Jesus prays, "I pray that they will all be one, just as you and I are one, as you are in me, Father, and I am in you. And may they be in us, so that the world will believe that you sent me." The love and unity that Christians have for one another is supposed to be a pretty powerful statement about the reality of Jesus Christ. The authenticity of Christ is made evident by our community, because we can form relationships that are at a level that just can't be found in other places. We're supposed to point to the reality of Christ. And when people see that, it's supposed to interest them. Right? Everybody would like to have this, but nobody ever seems to be able to find it. And you're supposed to come into the presence of a group of Christians and realize that they have what everyone is looking for. And it just isn't righteousness. So you make a new friend at work, right? They call one night and they say that they're going out with a couple of friends, and they're thinking about going to see the movie like The Shallows or something. All right, so you respond by saying that a movie like that has a girl running around in a bathing suit, probably has some pretty raw language in it, and you just aren't sure that that's the kind of thing that glorifies God, and that as a Christian you just aren't comfortable with that sort of thing. He's like, "All right, we don't have to do that. Why don't we all just meet at my house and play some poker?" And you say, gambling just isn't very good stewardship. So as a Christian, I don't think I should participate in that sort of thing. It's like, well, that's dumb, but, we don't have to play cards. There's a game on. Come on over, we'll have some beers and watch the game. So, you give him the little rap about how alcohol has caused so many of society's problems. And as a Christian, you're not sure that it glorifies God to sit around and drink alcohol, or even to sit around with people who are drinking alcohol. Right? She's like, okay, dude, I'll see you on Monday. I'm done. So when that dude hangs up the phone, you think he's going to spend the rest of the evening wondering if maybe he should be a Christian. Right? What Jesus is talking about here is actually pretty simple. What is it that would attract you to the Christian way of life? And it just isn't that mysterious. All right? Is it that you don't go to rock or hip hop concerts? Is that what would appeal to you? Right? Is it that we talk differently than other people, that we don't use the same words that they do? Right? That's not the kind of thing that attracts people to Christ. Is it that we don't go to see popular movies, or that we have our own music that sounds different from everyone else's? Is that what we're supposed to do to attract people to Christ? Is it that we have no sense of humor, that we can't laugh at obviously funny things just because they're a little bit like raw? Would it be that we avoid parties and bars and other places where people are enjoying themselves? Right? Now that's a real Christian, right? Someone that brings people to God. All of these things are really, really wrong-headed, okay? Jesus didn't do any of these things. And so later in this book, we're going to see Jesus sitting right in the middle of a hugely raw party. All right, maybe the craziest, rawest party that you could get into in all of Judea, which I don't know what that's saying, but it was like a tax collector party. And the people that he's talking to in this sermon and the Sermon on the Mount are horrified by the fact that Jesus is there with those people. They accuse him of eating and drinking with sinners and being a friend of people who drink too much. Right? They actually called him out and called him that. And he responds by saying that these are exactly the people that he came to see. Right? These are exactly the people that he's here to save. The sick people are the ones that need a doctor. And so Jesus was not some ultra-religious type. His opponents were. Right? His opponents would have fit in nicely with modern fundamentalist thinking. In fact, they are nearly exactly the same. Okay, stay away from bad stuff. This is exactly how I grew up. Right? We don't do these things, and we don't hang around with the people who do these things. And that is what makes us righteous. Right? And this list with the big X through it was the list that we lived by, but it was a much longer list. Right? So, or would it be more attractive to be people that know how to form successful relationships, including successful marriages that last for many years and maybe even for entire lifetimes? All right, that might be interesting to people. That sounds like something that is really along the lines of what people are thirsting for. So we live in a culture where people are simply unable to succeed in marriage. So more marriages fail than succeed. And the statistics are exactly the same inside the Christian community as they are on the outside of it. All right, getting married today can be a pretty scary proposition. It's no wonder that people just cohabitate without really ever considering getting married. Right? They've seen nothing but failure. They're cynical, and they're not even sure that it's possible for it to succeed. And so, what if they came along and they saw true followers of Christ succeeding in marriage and carrying that marriage through to victory over the decades? Right? That's something different. That's different than the culture that we're around. That's the right kind of difference. How about if they were to notice that Christians have purpose to their lives that goes beyond the temporary and beyond the imaginary? All right, so when you ask people what the purpose of their life is, they really don't have a response beyond, like getting a good job and, preparing for retirement. All right, it's like there isn't anything but to breed, feed, and die. All right, it's pretty pitiful. Or they'll say that their purpose is to be a really great person. But why? They have no basis for it at all. Right? They just pull it out of thin air. And so what if they came across a group of people that had a purpose that was rooted in reality? Might be appealing. They had the real security of knowing where they're headed for eternity. That would be something pretty different. Right? That would put a different cast on your entire life, because you don't need to worry about all the little things, and you become someone who really gives. Eternal perspectives turn people into givers instead of takers. Right? That is the right kind of different. Right? And these people are Christians who are able to enjoy themselves and, enjoy their friends in normal social activities. And, just the joy of relationship is fully satisfying. And so that would be the right kind of different. Right? Maybe you realize that your friend that's a Christian is the most understanding and friendly person that you know at work. All right, that's letting the light shine. That is what Jesus is encouraging us to do. Right? Or as a non-Christian, the Christians that live next door are the most open and welcoming people that you live around. Right? There is where people will see your good deeds and God will be glorified. You are a more loving person. Maybe people realize that whenever they need help, it's the Christians that consistently show up to be there for them. Like, dude, people come to Christ for exactly this reason. Right? When the chips are down, the party friends don't show up, and the Christians are there to serve, and they're there to help. There, right there, is the kind of different that we're supposed to be. Right? It's not that we're more holy than other people. It's not that we're more religious than other people. It's that we're more loving than other people. That's the difference that we need to show. So putting the lamp on a lampstand. All right, he says not to put it under a bowl. Put it up on a stand. So you're going to put it up kind of high where it can cast the light a long way. And so I think that he's suggesting that this is an intentional thing. This doesn't just kind of happen as a byproduct of living the Christian life. We have to be intentional enough and sacrificial enough to not only live the life, but to also join that with our words that give the glory to God for my deeds. We don't take credit for it ourselves. And all of this to the point where we are persecuted. To the point where people start to tell us to stop. All right, and so if we're doing that, then instead of our walk with God being something that is for our private edification, you truly become the salt of the world and the light to the world. And my whole walk with God is for others. And so we kind of draw the line right there for this morning. That's what I've got. The next section is yet another area of refutation where Jesus is going to directly take on what God wants from us in order for us to go to heaven. And this is very different than the belief system of the opposition that he's talking to. And so they held pretty tightly to the idea that obeying the law of God was how you got to heaven. Jesus is going to explain that that's completely false. And so there you go.